The wind carried the scent of dust and dry grass across the wide, empty fields, whispering through broken fence posts and rattling the loose boards of the old farmhouse. It was the kind of land that looked peaceful from a distance, golden under the fading sun, but up close it told a different story, one of struggle, of survival, of lives worn thin by time and hardship. Elias Turner had lived on that land long enough to understand its moods. He knew when the soil would yield and when it would refuse. He knew the sound of coming rain and the silence that meant drought, and he knew loneliness better than most men. He stood near the edge of his field, his hands rough and weathered, his eyes scanning the horizon as the last light of day stretched long shadows across the ground. The harvest had been poor that year, too little rain in the spring, too much heat in the summer. The crops had grown thin and stubborn, like they didn't quite belong there anymore. He sighed and adjusted his hat, turning back toward the farmhouse. Another long day done, another night of quiet waiting ahead. It was then he saw it. At first, it was nothing more than a shape, a dark, uneven form near the old dirt road that cut through the edge of his property. Something out of place, something that hadn't been there that morning. Elias paused, narrowing his eyes. The light was fading fast, making it hard to see clearly. It could have been a fallen branch, or a sack someone had dropped. But something about it tugged at him, a faint unease settling in his chest. He hesitated. Out here, people minded their own business. It was a rule that kept trouble at a distance. You didn't go looking for problems, and in return, problems usually passed you by. Usually, he exhaled slowly and started walking toward it. The closer he got, the more his unease grew. The shape was too still, too human. His steps slowed. No, he muttered under his breath. By the time he reached it, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the world painted in dim shades of blue and gray. He crouched down, his heart beginning to pound. It was a woman. She lay half, curled on the ground, her clothes torn and dust covered, her hair tangled and streaked with dirt. Her skin looked pale even in the fading light, and for a moment Elias thought he might already be too late. He reached out cautiously, placing 2 fingers against her neck. A pulse, faint but there. Relief and dread hit him at the same time. "What in God's name?" he whispered. She wasn't from around here. That much was clear. Her features, her clothing different. Foreign, he had seen a few travelers pass through over the years, workers brought in for the railroads or the mines, but never anyone left like this. Never like this. He glanced down the road, but there was no sign of anyone. No wagon tracks fresh enough to matter, no movement in the distance. Whoever had brought her here was long gone, or had never intended for her to be found. Elias swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. He could leave her. The thought came uninvited, but it settled heavily in his mind. It would be the simpler choice. Safer, no questions, no complications. Out here, survival often meant knowing when to walk away. But as he looked at her, at the way her chest barely rose and fell, at the bruises along her arms, at the quiet desperation etched into her stillness, something inside him refused. He sighed, already knowing he'd made his decision. "Damn it," he muttered. Carefully, he slid his arms beneath her and lifted. She was lighter than he expected, her body limp, her head falling gently against his shoulder. He adjusted his grip and stood, turning back toward the farmhouse. Each step felt heavier than the last. By the time he reached the house, the sky had darkened completely, stars beginning to pierce through the vast emptiness above. He kicked the door open with his boot and carried her inside, laying her carefully on the worn couch near the hearth. The fire had burned low, but there were still embers. He quickly added wood, coaxing the flames back to life. Warm light filled the room, flickering across the walls. He turned back to the woman. Up close, the details were clearer. Her face was marked with exhaustion, her lips cracked, her skin cold to the touch. There were signs of injury. Nothing immediately fatal, but enough to tell a story he didn't yet understand. He fetched water, dampened a cloth, and began to clean the dirt from her face. She didn't stir. "Who did this to you?" he murmured. No answer came. Hours passed. Elias sat in a chair nearby, watching, waiting. He wasn't sure what he expected. Perhaps that she would wake suddenly, or that her breathing would stop. But she remained suspended somewhere in between, alive but distant. The fire crackled softly, filling the silence. Then, just as he began to wonder if she would ever wake, she moved. It was subtle at first. A slight twitch of her fingers, a faint shift in her breathing. Elias leaned forward, his attention sharpening. Her lips parted. And then, in a voice so soft it was almost lost to the air, she whispered, "Please, not again." Elias froze. The words hit him harder than he expected, sending a chill through his chest that had nothing to do with the cold outside. Not again. It wasn't just fear in her voice. It was memory. It was something lived, something repeated. He stood slowly, stepping closer. "Hey," he said gently, "you're safe. You hear me, you're safe now." Her eyes fluttered, struggling to open. When they did, they were unfocused at first, darting around the room as though searching for something, or someone. Then they landed on him. For a brief moment, confusion flickered across her face, and then fear. She recoiled, trying to push herself up, but her strength failed her. A small cry escaped her lips, and she shrank back against the couch. "No, please," she whispered again, her voice trembling. "Not again." Elias raised his hands slightly, stepping back to give her space. "Easy," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you." She stared at him, her breathing uneven, her entire body tense. It took a long moment before his words seemed to reach her, before the immediate panic in her eyes began to fade. "You're not them?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "No," he replied firmly. "Whoever they are, I'm not one of them." She studied his face, searching for something, truth, perhaps, or deception. Whatever she saw seemed to ease her, if only a little. Her shoulders slumped, and she sank back against the couch, exhaustion reclaiming her. Elias exhaled slowly, realizing he'd been holding his breath. "What's your name?" he asked after a moment. She hesitated, as though the question itself required effort. "May," she said finally. "May," he repeated, nodding. "I'm Elias." Silence settled between them again, but it was different now. Less tense, more fragile. After a while, May spoke again. "They left me," she said, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the room. "Thought I would die." Elias clenched his jaw. "Who?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted shut, as though the memory itself was too heavy to hold. But before sleep claimed her once more, she whispered, "Men who don't like witnesses." Elias felt a cold weight settle in his chest. He didn't know her story yet, didn't know what she had seen, what she had survived, but one thing was certain. Whatever had happened to her wasn't over, and somehow, whether he wanted it or not, neither was his quiet life. The wind outside howled softly against the farmhouse, carrying with it the promise of something coming, something neither of them could escape.